Hi everyone, and welcome to tonight's real lecture. This week we have Michael Wright from Wright and Associates. The firm's been going for about 16 years now, and they've done quite a variety of projects. Tonight, Mike will be talking about the 8 projects they've done at the Shrine of Remembrance, which has gone for 15 years, and they've also done work on the Burwood campus at Deakin and Dandenong Civic Centre and quite a lot of other projects. So I'll hand it over to Michael now, and he'll take you through it. Thank you, Mike.
Thanks very much, Jess. And thanks everyone for the invitation to come down and talk. Can everyone hear me at the back? I can mumble sometimes, so I'll move over here a bit. Is that a bit better? Yeah, I think that's a bit better. So if I do go a bit quiet, just let us know at the back there. I'm hoping there's a very mixed audience of architects and landscape architects. There's a lot in here for both disciplines and, of course, our construction manager friends. So I've got lots of construction details and construction photos going back through this project. I did start out trying to do like the collected works of Wright Associates, of which there are at least 500 on the ground, but gave up and decided that a focused talk on the shrine might give a bit of insight into the way we sometimes think and some of the diversity of thinking that spanned the period of time we've been lucky enough to be working on the Shrine of Remembrance. I guess it's in some ways timely to be considering this landscape. We're coming up on the much vaunted 100th anniversary of the hopeless Gallipoli landing of April 25, 2015. I'm sure everyone's seen the latest movies, you know, the Water Diviner and Russell Crowe's efforts and all of those things. And I think it does remain in our public consciousness. Now, obviously, whether you're a pacifist, a member of the RSL, or a returned service man or woman, there's no doubt that the role of the shrine in Melbourne is an important one in a kind of civic sense and also in design terms. Obviously, as a practice, I'm here representing Creative Partnership with my partner Catherine Rush, and I guess the collective efforts of, I've lost count, probably 60 or 70 creative individuals from right around Australia and elsewhere who have contributed to our work. I guess our main focus has been in the civic domain, so we don't do a lot of developer stuff. We've tried to do greenfields residential with developers and got beautifully sacked about a week ago, so not always our cup of tea. An interesting case of trying to find where your skills and expertise really lie and not trying to overstretch into areas which are a bit hard to find interesting, so a bit of a lesson for us there. The shrine has a really fantastic design history. It was a project that a lot of people never actually wanted. It was won in competition after an initial kind of public debate about what to do to memorialise the incredible loss that Victoria had in the First World War. And it was Sir John Monash, the great engineer, general and polymath that was involved in supporting the competition and ultimately selecting the site on St Kilda Road. We'll talk a bit more about Monash later, but for architects and landscape architects, Monash is a fantastic figure. Pioneered the use of reinforced concrete almost per se in Australia through his company, through his purchase of the patents from Monia concrete technology, and was responsible for a lot of bridges. And his first role in construction was actually working on Prince's Bridge across the Yarra. And Monash's role in the shrine is kind of memorialised on the western wall with a fabulous inscription talking about the holy ground. This drawing is a Hudson and Wardrop competition entry of about 1922, as I recall, and I think it really shows an amazing kind of ambition for this building and its situation on St Kilda Road. It was talked about at the time as as Melbourne's Acropolis, and was created essentially on a clear bit of ground on St Kilda Road. There was an old, very large estate called the Grange, the remains of that. That was all cleared away, and much of what's in place there now is a completely artificial construction. A fabulous sort of civic presence, and I think much more visible in those times. This is about 1940, I think these were shot, showing the northern reflecting pool, which was later removed. Phenomenal achievement, and obviously paid for by public subscription. It was essentially a form of raffle, which paid for the shrine and its environment. And there were many goes at the surrounding landscape. It's been tinkered with for a very long time, right up until 1954, with the advent of the World War II memorial, which is the great ceremonial cross forming the northern forecourt, opened by Queen Elizabeth on her first visit to Australia. Not much really happened on the Shrine Reserve up until some works in the late 80s on minor memorials, and really the shrine had sat like a kind of fading civic jewel down the bottom of St Kilda Road, obviously enduring the defacement of the Vietnam era, and it was really through the visionary guidance really of Dimity Reid, architect, critic, academic, and the then trustees John Taylor, David Mitchell and others, who came together with John Wertheimer, the great Melbourne project manager, to commission a new master plan, and that all started off in about 2001. Our practice was engaged with Ashton Raggett McDougall to really work out what to do. There had been a scheme by Eggleston MacDonald to provide accommodation under the shrine building in the abandoned Undercroft, but that had not gone ahead. From a landscape point of view, the reserve had been managed essentially as an arboretum and had kind of crept into the Melbourne City Council kind of management domain, and it kind of was starting to move away from this great tradition of the shrine as a special place in Melbourne's civic fabric. That's the Sir John Monash quotation, which is kind of inscribed in very large letters on the western wall of the shrine. So I guess working with ARM, we started to look again at the shrine and how it could be re-established within the parklands of the domain with its 11 hectare reserve. We started to think about this idea of the shrine as a form of temenos, a kind of a completely kind of constructed world, not just a building, but all of the elements that go together to make up a kind of sacred parkland, I guess. Correct me if I'm wrong on the use of the word temenos. And returning to this sort of idea about the temple on the hill that was described in the early ambition of those who really founded the place, and also Hudson and Wardrop's ideas for how the shrine might sit in the city. A lot of that was really about decluttering, taking things away, and editing the tree population, 450 sort of old and strange trees which needed management again. I think if we recall that Hudson and Wardrop drawing, it was much more around a kind of formal, almost classical, perhaps City Beautiful approach to civic placemaking. So we started to think again about how we could re-establish this axial landscape carved out of forests, very much in the manner of perhaps Vaux-le-Vicomte with its grandiose alleys. But that is really kind of the essence of what we found on the site. So we started to look. I hope you can see this is right. This is an interesting review of 15 years of design representation as well. So this is one of our rather odd marker drawings of 2001, I think. It just shows some of these ideas about clearing out the alleys. Is there a pointer? Perhaps not. Clearing out this sort of cluttered classical framework to reveal the shrine again in a kind of ordered, forested world. And this is all built on, I guess, slightly romantic ideas about Greece and Turkey and how we might, re-establish this vision for this building. And then looking from a landscape design point of view at planting design, as we saw it, for this dry constructed ridge. So trying to analyse what was there, and this is I guess a process we invented at the time to look at it, understand, and analyse this tree population on the site. So we had some basic categories to try to begin to understand these trees as a group, and then to recommend how it might end up being adjusted. And then also to look at how indeed with age, mismanagement, poor tree selection, and then obviously climate change, what was likely to happen in the future. And at that time we found that 40% of the trees were likely to go in 10 or 15 years, and that's pretty much what's happened on the site today. So this went through this sort of crazy Excel kind of sieve analysis, and we'll return to the outcomes of this work a bit later on. I think a key principle in this landscape is this idea of memorialisation. Every tree had its plaque for every unit associated with the place, and these trees become the focus for gatherings year in, year out, and it's actually this link between particular trees on the Shrine Reserve and these groups of people that brings people back year after year. So we developed this planting mix, really pine, eucalyptus, cypress and oak, these great long-lived kind of dry survivor trees from the Mediterranean and elsewhere that would continue a lot of the design language that was already on the site and then develop a really long-lived tree population in perpetuity. Much of this work also looked at memorials. Like many sort of parkland landscapes, the place just sort of accretes stuff. People want to give stuff, donate stuff, locate things on the reserve. So there was a little bit of focus on how that might happen in the future as well, which informed the placement of other objects over the last decade or so. I guess the main area of interest for us has been the development of the 4 courtyards on the site, where we've played a greater or lesser role. These, I guess, are the great, the masterstroke on the site, if you will, developed by Ashraga McDougall, essentially as a response to the requirements for universal access, which we'll see. So in 2001, it was pretty much impossible for a very ageing population of returned service people to actually get into the crypt and the sanctuary of the shrine, and that was actually almost the primary briefing criterion for what became the new visitor centre, as well as providing accommodation under the building. So the design master planners, Neil Masterton, Ian McDougall, obviously Howard, and Tim Wright of ARM, looking at, again, at the Hudson and Wardrop schemes, developed an approach to this building to some degree based on the original conception of Hudson and Wardrop. So in these model images of the time, you see that there's a second terrace of masonry below that upper rise, which is built on the site. And this is all sort of grassed over now. So this became, I guess, a way into starting to think about a way into this building and to use the very extensive undercroft, which is the Forest of Colin, which I imagine some have already been to today. Opened just in last November in its second stage. So this is an ARM scheme or something that didn't happen. I think we're probably fortunate it didn't happen. These are some of the early studies of that period with ideas and tests for those courtyard interiors. And this one also talks a little bit about the courtyards as a kind of section of tube which spirals up Swanson Street. And obviously, I think the key move is this idea about a very gentle 1 in 20 incline. I think just in their section there you can see east and west, that incline down into the undercroft space. So the light brown is the courtyards, obviously, and then the yellow is the accommodation, admin, office, visitor centre, and then the disabled access to the crypt. So that apparently simple move, I guess, cracked the nut in this particular case. These courtyard forms are faceted and to be executed in precast and in situ concrete. And you can see there providing that graded access down into the undercroft. And on that drawing you can see the column field, which has just recently been fitted out for exhibition display, back of house and admin. This all seemed very challenging at the time. So Ian, just after a media launch, convincing the trustees of what was about to happen. You can obviously see the look on some of their faces, being a bit worried about perhaps the scale and enormity of the change that was about to happen to a building which hadn't really been adjusted since 1934. But obviously a brilliant sort of esquisse and partie for the entry to the building. And obviously some very major adjustments happened along the way. Kind of industrial scale archaeology happened, revealing huge areas of uncontrolled fill, contaminated fill, and the full range of construction problems of the time. So these are images of that construction sequence and the northwest courtyard coming out of the ground. That accommodation below a propped stair, and then the access out to the right-hand side of that slide, out to the courtyard entry. I think this was perhaps only possible because of the order and simplicity of this front elevation, which I think is quite brilliant. Those folded walls kind of at once buttressing and stabilising the building in the landscape, and then providing this completely respectful granite frame, I suppose, for the walls within, and the sort of these different courtyard worlds that have emerged on the site. The landscape development of the courtyards, I guess, began with an approach to the building as the World War I memorial. So we started to think about what was involved in the Gallipoli landings, the landscape colours, the sense of what was there in the landscape, and then also ideas about, perhaps obviously, about the bunkers, what it was like to be below grade, and how you might be able to create something like for today, which had a sense of antiquity about it, and a sense of being able to age. So these are some of the images of that period in the design process. And then we actually went through, and we'll go through a few of these different schemes for the later courtyards. Went through quite a number of schemes, trying to find, wrestle with this courtyard design, and eventually came back to, I guess, the essence of the garden, and wanting to place this big olive tree, which was just happened to be growing nearby. So we actually ended up constructing the landscape response to this courtyard around this olive tree, which we eventually moved, as you'll see. These are some of the sketch studies at the time, so dealing with the need for a 1 in 20 loading bay, so coming down through the body of the courtyard and down into the doorway there, and the big tree on the right. Construction drawing just showing this sort of central space, and these, I guess, fragments and shards of landscape material. I guess a plan of considerable energy, and the line on the north side there, a line created out of the shadow of the northern wall at the 11th of November at 11 a.m, the day that the armistice was signed. And then we looked at moving this big olive tree, which is always great fun, moving these trees around. And these slides, for those who are interested, would just show some of the work involved in doing that. Sizing up it was a 5 by 6 metre root ball, then water jet cutting in on two sides at 6 monthly intervals, so that the roots had a chance to grow back, and then trenching around it to create this sort of fibrous root ball. The trunk was then bolted together with a custom-made steel frame, so through each of the trunks there we bolted through to get a lifting attachment, and then it was undercut progressively and then eased out of the ground from above with a hydraulic crane. And there we see a classic demonstration of the lack of taproots of trees for those who are technically minded. Most trees, of course, don't occupy much more than about the top 500 mil of soil, so this was especially true on this site where the council have been watering since about 1973 for 15 minutes every night. So it was a little bit of a surprise to see this root ball come up with just 300 or 400 mil. A somewhat nerve-wracking and risky enterprise this was. As this thing was lifted, bits of the root ball started to peel away and drop off, much to the amusement of the 3 television news crews who were recording it all in minute detail. And there it is going in. And a great way to start, I guess, to start this project off. And obviously a very imperfect tree, and I guess we selected this tree primarily for its ability to transplant. They've been transplanted like this for thousands of years, and will indeed grow for hundreds of years thereafter. There are olive trees in Europe, North Africa, known to be thousands of years old. And this one, I'm sure you've seen in those images just how craggy and kind of distressed, almost damaged, perhaps even blown up this was. So this gave us this fantastic kind of initial character, and chimed in perfectly with, I guess, an aesthetic around remembrance, longevity, age, dealing with Asia Minor, the plants of the Dardanelles. All these things came together in this olive tree, if you believe the story. Obviously, a big tree like that, that then drives the technical issue of keeping a porous medium above the tree root ball. So this is all decked around. So we designed this big timber wharf deck, really. Drove the builders completely crazy doing this. We've used this again since. It's a routed carborundum strip, 10 by 10, routed in to give us slip resistance, so those black lines going across, and then countersunk stainless steel coach screws at 600 centres doubled up, so you end up with something like 8,000 bolts or coach screws in each deck. That certainly keeps the carpenters busy and a lot of hand labour, but you end up with this fantastic kind of surface of intricate crafted detail, and gets us a long way away from those bugle screws and gull screws and all that stuff which you inevitably see in decking, and from which the decking inevitably seems to craze away. So this was sort of an idea about a sort of maritime wharf deck, and then just some snaps of the concrete formwork. Another risk here in just keeping the tree alive through construction. Some of our rebates and set downs in that concrete. All are, I guess, consciously designed around firing lines, reinforced, military items and the like. And also, I guess, in the back of our mind, the idea about a ruin, and again, some thoughts around, this is actually one of the theatres at Priene in Asia Minor, this giant-sized marbles and ruins of Europe. And just some snaps of trees going. I thought it might be instructive just to look at sort of growth over time. I think, as you'll see, perhaps one thing that differentiates landscape architecture from architecture is this thing that it improves with age. And I think from a practice point of view, it's something that we've thought about quite a lot. Will what you put in actually improve, or will it kind of fade and get really ugly and scratched and horrible? And maybe that's what differentiates, at sort of a primary level, the difference between landscape and architecture. I'm not sure. I think architecture is installed occasionally, it weathers gracefully. Does it improve with time? Is really open to question. It's always interesting to see the heroic architectural photo. It's taken the moment the dust has been cleaned away from the pavements, and really the design intention doesn't really come to the fore until much later. And now, to be honest, it's probably getting a bit overgrown. This is Parthenocissus tricuspidata, the self-clinging Boston ivy. It's not dead. It's not a failure. It's deciduous, and then in about Anzac Day, about now, it'll be starting to turn bright red. And then the other plants, bay laurel, upright oaks, to form this sort of European hedgerow. There's some recent stuff from October last year, I think it was. And the very much living Boston ivy wall, which is also found on Victoria Barracks. And probably needing a midlife replanting in places. But still, really use that deck, survive the test of time. Fantastic 240 by 60 class 2 timbers, recycled from a woolshed somewhere. And I think here, the entry courtyard, an amazing dramatic entry statement. We helped with the paving, that's about it. And fantastic example of a space almost with nothing in it. Nothing in it but this sort of splash of blood red, the kind of blood of the poppies on the glass, and this the extraordinary use of colour from ARM. And this got me thinking a lot about those who promulgate minimalism in design, and I'm not quite sure I could ever agree with them. And some of that early lighting. We'll come back onto the courtyard, so I just wanted to just touch on some of the memorial designs that were also worked on the Shrine Reserve. This steps through now to about 2007-8. The master plan is kind of in full swing, and this scheme for the placement of Peter Collette's Cobbers sculpture came across the drawing boards, and these are some early concept ideas for that. So the figure itself is the second casting of Peter Collette's Cobbers sculpture, and which was constructed in the Western Front in France to commemorate the Battle of Fromelles in July 1916. Peter Collette, fantastic figurative bronze sculptor, and our role as a landscape practice was to work with Peter to locate a site for the sculpture, and then develop a setting for it in this big landscape in the Shrine Reserve. So just some images of that. Originally to be executed in stone, this is the original sculpture, and it's siting near Fromelles in Flanders, and happily or unhappily located near some remnant German military bunkers, hence the use of concrete. And that feature you see in the back there is actually one of the things they call ridges in Flanders. So the sense of terrain there is kind of amazingly flattened. All of the stories you read about, advancing over the flat land up onto the ridge or, through the ditch, these are minute changes in terrain. Might be 4, 5 or 6 metres in total elevation change. And that's another one of the ridges in the back there, believe it or not. Incredibly flat land, and the village situated there in the Commonwealth War Graves Cemetery at the front, and then this ridiculous, horrible, sticky, soupy mud. And one definitely doesn't want to look too closely at this battlefield. This is somewhere where I think Australia suffered 5,333 casualties in a single night, and probably the worst military tragedy the country's ever endured. The sighting on St Kilda Road eventually also was executed in concrete. A lot of debates about this idea about recreating the fortification look, I suppose. The slabs themselves onto which the sculpture was fixed. Later, we actually selected these from the West Melbourne Power Station site on Spencer Street that was being demolished. Found that there's these fantastic floor slabs available, and had them brought down by Guilfoyles, the wreckers, down onto the site. And interestingly enough, we later found out that it was Sir John Monash's office who had specified this concrete. So here we have a kind of recovered relic of a Monash scheme brought down and used on the Shrine Reserve. So pretty interesting to find that out. Some of the details and signage, which we'll touch on a bit later. This sort of interesting in this sign, but it recurs in one of the later courtyards. This idea around using recovered materials is actually just a giant piece of road plate. You might see excavations in the road, and this sign was actually just created from the recovery of one of those pre-rusted form and cantilevered off this beton brew sort of foundation courses through to 2009 there. Around this time, we're also involved in helping Catherine Rickaris, landscape architect, to visualise the Women's Service Memorial on the Shrine Reserve, and these are just some renders of that. A kind of step forward into a different form of representation, and a crazily high-res render. And by now, these are actually individual blades of grass. I think there's something like 5 million in a scene. So we're very happy with this, with the colour and light rendition. And a really interesting moment in terms of design representation where 10 years on, so much had changed in terms of design practice right through the industry. More on memorials, just a little bit of a look at the Gallipoli Memorial. Again, forming part of that idea around making the edge of the reserve. And then looking at the trees, by about 2009, Melbourne had its worst drought for a very long time, and the population of trees on the reserve had definitely started to show its age. And at about then, we began the process of really closely assessing what to do, and this has been a process of a yearly assessment on site, and then working with the original ideas of the master plan to replant the reserve comprehensively with obviously that original conception of the species mix of cypress, eucalyptus, oak and pine as a kind of backbone planting. So you can see all the little dots on the drawing, the new trees year by year, and it gives you an indication of the way in which one of these old tree populations just needs refreshment, a bit like a crop. They're there today, but eventually they'll be gone. So try to look at the way in which time will influence a big tree population like this. And to be honest, Getting these trees sort of refreshed has been one of the most satisfying parts of this particular project, and working out ways to, to group and get these things going. It sounds like a kind of simple victory, but the levels of bureaucracy involved are challenging, and all the establishment practices needed in these old compacted grasslands have required a lot of scrutiny. And fantastic, we're now starting to see things like stone pines and these fantastic old cedars and oaks and so forth, which are going to grow out to form a new kind of urban forest. Stepping forward to the recent, stage 2 component of the work at the Shrine courtyards. These are some recent slides about that, which has really been the addition of 2 courtyards on the south and the major kind of galleries development, which has brought exhibition and display to the shrine in a way that hasn't been there previously. So there are real highlights in these galleries, including the Davana Gallipoli boat. So it's one of the original landing boats, which has been brought in into the Undercroft zone, and it is quite an incredible display of these World War I artefacts. And these some original renders and ideas from the design development phase. So you can see on the drawings, the red is the main public exhibition, the blue the back of house, and then on the south there, admin office and schools entry. So the 2 courtyards on the south side, on the left, on the southwest, a terrace courtyard, really for staff, and on the southeast, a new schools entry courtyard. And then these fantastic sections showing the way in which all of these functions are embedded within that subgrade space, buried under grass and under the actual structure of the building. And the courtyards again, ultimately, I think it was a condition of the original heritage permit that the scheme would end up being symmetrical about each axis. So it was a very good permit to get because it meant that the second stage just had to happen at some point. And these are some early schemes for those 2 courtyards. So these, the original idea for the courtyards was all different. On the northwest, we have the olive tree garden courtyard. On the northeast, that dramatic entry. On the southeast, a brief for a schools entry courtyard, and then on the southwest, more of a green staff retreat, and some hilarious cartoons of that time. And working again with Ian McDougall, we were looking at some idea about how to represent the history and service of Australians in the Pacific. And movies like The Thin Red Line were definitely on our mind, with the sort of horrible kind of tropical savanna grasslands as a feature, and then the potential use of bamboo. So we've basically pursued this scheme for the southwest using those principles. And it became this, it just kept on trying to cover everything in grass for some reason. So we had this big green sward and this sort of strange, wild, woolly bamboo grass around the edge. There are a lot of ways to do that. Miscanthus sinensis giganteus, some of the other tropical bamboos, and had a really good look at the potential microclimate in there and how it might figure in the landscape there. And unfortunately, not many people were happy with this scheme, and we're essentially asked to revisit it, which does happen from time to time. And we started to look at a new client brief, one using all natural materials and these principles established up there, and returning to some ideas that we'd explored to some degree in the northwest. and then looking at how we might begin to talk to the idea of the Pacific region as a battle zone, and started to work with these themes. Again, trying to look at a way in which a tree could form a primary design idea, and then the rest would follow from that. So these are, I guess, reference ideas from that period. Very strongly interested in this idea of a giant strangler fig, and then how we might actually achieve that in this courtyard. So we actually end up finding a suitable tree in the nursery. So this is a Ficus rubiginosa, Port Jackson fig. Itself another kind of crazy remnant in a nursery. Have these fantastic double trunks and aerial roots and impossible branching habit, never to be used in any proper kind of street landscape or anything like that. So an ideal candidate for us, and this was later on installed in the project. And trying to bring in this idea of the tropics into this landscape proposal. And this was one of our very quick sketches, I guess, used to try and capture some of these ideas. So the planning is similar to the other courtyards. One large central open space, and then the need to come up at 1 in 21 around the back there. So that was a very common theme within these schemes. And then some renders of the time, just trying to explore this idea again about placing the big tree in the courtyard, and then how to, I guess, work around it and integrate it. And in this case, almost suppress it. And here we see these large concrete plinth forms underneath, essentially designed to suppress the tree and try to keep it small, encourage aerial roots, and then the whole surrounded underneath with a 1,200 deep concrete wall. So we actually built this big concrete bucket, the ground plane render. You can see here we're reprising these concrete plinth shapes with plants kind of coming up in between. Not quite sure where they came from, really. Possibly bunker foundations. The builders christened them the concrete coffins, which was interesting. And just the details for those. I think you can just see there at the top left, these really deep concrete restraint walls to try and restrain this tree, essentially turn into a large bonsai. On the top right, the plinths coming across that foundation formation, and then just quite simply detailed as a set of in situ forms. And then a favourite drawing note about how to achieve this concrete, which is quite hard to, believe it or not, it's quite hard to achieve something that is rough and ready. It takes a lot of energy. Everyone wants to make everything completely blemish-free and seamless and perfect and pure and all of those things. I think the builders were quite relieved to find a way to do these things kind of crudely. They're still perhaps a little bit smooth. And these are some recent shots of that and some of the construction sequence. Moving in the tree, rotating on the crane, and then building these things around it and trying to look after it on the way through. So these plinth forms gave us, I guess it's another form of ruin again, and gave us a lot of kind of horticultural challenges. The pavement hasn't been done for a while. This is actually a form of concrete you might have seen around city streets. It was once much favoured by council engineers for driveways, and we're really keen to find something that looked as if the Army Corps of Engineers had been out with a steel mesh or something and just decided to make this happen. It was actually achieved, ultimately achieved with a whole range of trials done in the past that have been created by cast iron pit lids with those grids on them, essentially being dropped onto the wet concrete and then moved every time, so that the concreters would have a couple of these as we move between them, kind of trampling them down. So this was a sort of modified version of this, perhaps brought into the modern OH&S environment, and they had a lot of kind of little issues with this technique, but eventually got it down. And we documented really casual grid alignments around the construction joints and so on, essentially to get an idea about the provisional or the ready-made or the very quick response, and that it was a bit of a leap of faith, I guess, to look at a pavement like that. And here we have our kind of coffins starting to grow in with this sort of a very intense, I must say, subtropical landscape brought in around it. I'll just step through these. Some quirky details that emerged, I guess, midway. These are actually frangipanis, but growing out of precast pit risers. So for a couple $100, we've got these cubic metre planters, some bits and pieces of railway line, just placed essentially as edging, and like bits of industrial infrastructure or military hardware kind of cluttered about. The tree itself giving us this sense of shade and scale, and an idea perhaps about the bunion, the plinths, and this sort of the railway to nowhere, I guess it might be. I sort of really like these plinths, obviously. A simple idea that seems to be doing something, and obviously providing, they actually provide a gentle level change, seating, bit of spatial definition. The wall climbers are growing from pinned reinforcing rods, so it's just a deformed bar, that crazy stuff in reinforced concrete with all little ribs all over it. So that was the ARM/Wright kind of idea about some idea about netting or logic of incarceration and all iron bars sort of wrapping around the walls. Fantastic tree, Ceiba speciosa, with its personnel destroying spines. Hoya forsteriana as an understory palm, and these crazy wall climbers. And then our brutally detailed rusting steel seats. So these are just executed in mild steel on recovered wharf timber. Very simple to do. The view from the office, and then some recent shots looking at some of that plant growth. And if I can get this to work, I think I can, with 4 fingers slide across and look around. This is a look around panorama prepared by Chris Erskine in our office, which hopefully will work and give you just a bit of a sense, if you haven't been there, of this scheme. Those rails, these rustic seats, over in the corner there, kind of a rusty pipe, apparently a sort of buried service, but actually created for its job there as a sort of garden edge. The grid concrete, and then ground cover and other plants designed to kind of come right across. So this is a fantastic succulent carpet that's going to come right across. And then later additions of what we called air portable furniture. So lightweight stuff that might have been brought in or parachuted in to fit this sort of military bunker theme. Just going to swipe that. How about that? Growing like Burko, as Jeremy Stewart of ARM portrays it. And hopefully came that idea of a sort of ruined bunker that eventually will be overcome with vegetation. Not so sure about the pink flowers. They seem to belong to that genre of garden making, which is like the little guy in the temple who seems to live there and just comes out and has tended the place for decades. But they've literally not stopped flowering. It's a fantastic plant called Euphorbia lipstick pink. If you want something to flower perpetually and drive you crazy, I can highly recommend it. But it's been a big hit with visitors. And just some more shots of that. The climbers going Burko, as Jeremy puts it. These big tropical leaves. Planting sketch. Obviously got a lot of interest in as many species as possible. Then on the other side, a very different approach again, the school's entry courtyard. You can see there in that schematic render an idea about a small, I guess it's an amphitheatre, created to address small school groups as they come in. They enter into an auditorium, it's an orientation space, and then up into the galleries. Now this scheme arose as a response to that brief, and also, again, a landscape essentially to be designed without plants, to give very strong contrast. So we have the bright red entry courtyard, the garden courtyard, this sort of tropical bunker, and then the southeastern courtyard designed with this very distinctive pattern, actually based on some of the razzle-dazzle camouflage patterns of the period. And some of those, we're probably thankful that ARM didn't see. Quite amazing attempts to essentially disguise the shape of the object in question. We worked on this, brought the idea of using rubber rock. So as you enter this courtyard, there's a kind of acoustic dampening effect created by this sort of soft surface underneath. And these are some early shots of that finished project. The rubber rock, just for the technically minded, the rubber rock has this period where it stays a little bit light brown, and UV light eventually burns that off to its true colour. So back in October, it still hadn't gone through the full period of summer, so it's still kind of being seasoned in. These are shots from there with these amazing black walls, and this interior which will eventually be sapped or completely of colour. So I'll go back to that white and charcoal. I'm not quite sure what this is all about in a design term. Perhaps a stealth fighter or something like that, but sort of inscrutably sombre and severe. And with these amazing walls, with actually the map of the world inscribed in dots. All, I guess, fantastically enlivened by the arrival of this amazing poppy, a shade structure that emerged out of the joint design process executed by ARM in perforated metal, and hung to shade this new courtyard. I think, again, a fantastic use of colour to really animate this what would otherwise be a very, very severe scheme. I've got one more look around. Up tab, thank you. Not usually using a Macintosh. Other one? Thank you. And this again is another Chris Erskine panorama view at night, and you can see here that map of the world coming around in the lighting. Beautiful lighting designed by Electrolyte, very simply executed just by placing a single LED strip light at the top there and backlighting these perforated walls. And we start to get a sense of I'd love to know how many actual holes there are in these things. And then the poppy overhead, perhaps one of the most convincing demonstrations of art for architecture without artists that there has been, I think, and obviously going to attract a lot of attention for them. And those step platforms, while they may look harsh in the scheme, covered in this interesting sort of soft rubber. So you have a reading of this as a sort of brutal space, but then when you actually get it, it's sort of strangely soft, tactile, and kind of hushed. And the lighting here is truly fantastic, and we had absolutely nothing to do with it. Really, really great. Really worth just poking your head in the door there of an evening just to see that, I think. That's pretty much it, I think. A little bit of insight into the reserve at the Shrine from the master plan, through a bunch of details, some ideas about landscape construction. You'll notice we haven't really referred to particular products or things you can buy from a factory, or I think a lot of our interest is in what we can do as designers to actually craft unique details, work with concrete, timber, steel, to make things that are new and distinctive. Because a lot of design these days seems to be about specifying particular material, and I think if you can really start with a strong idea and then work out how to achieve it, that's a very strong way to travel. You can find out more at our website. It's like all websites in construction. It's got a lot of funny dead links and stuff, but one of those panoramas is up there, the garden panorama, so if you want to have another look at that, that's certainly available. And that's my 270 slides in 60 minutes.